Hello, I'm Martin Lewis from MoneySavingExpert.com, and I wanted to just record a quick video about your rights when going back to university in this strange time of the pandemic. Now, many people, both students and often their parents, have got in touch with me saying, look, this is outrageous. I'm still being charged £9,000 in tuition fees, even though the university is saying all or most of the courses are going to be online. Can I get a refund? Well, I think to an extent you're right. Much of the experience of university is what you gain from being there face to face, talking to lecturers, teachers, other students, and all the soft skills that you learn around, whether it's being engaged in clubs and society or student unions. So certainly I can understand the feeling of being disenfranchised by not being able to attend and that you're not getting your money's worth. However, governments across the UK government and the national governments have all said as long as online courses offer quality and are fit for purpose, you are not due a refund merely because you are being taught online. Of course, in Scotland there are no fees, but it's a general point I'm making. So that's the rule that we're hearing from government. Now, my suspicion is that's been done for a couple of reasons. One, university finances are under stress, like any businesses right now. They're struggling themselves due to COVID, and many universities have been struggling for funding anyway. And also because, well, if you pay less tuition fees, there isn't enough money for the universities to run. Who makes up the gap? The government. Remember, the entire loan system was brought in. So because in the past, the governments gave universities their money rather than the student. And then students gave some of the money in the form of student loans and governments paid the rest. And the shift towards £9,000 tuition fees, many people think that suddenly from nowhere the universities got a huge amount more money. No, they lost some of the grants they were getting and it was replaced by being paid by students in the form of a loan. So this was a shift of the burden from the state towards the individual who, if they earn enough, would repay later. I'm not going to go into my whole student finance talk now. It's a big one. I've got a whole 60-minute video on it called Student Loan Decoded on Money Saving Expert. Do have a watch of that. So governments would have to make up the gap. Now, I've said what the government perspective is. Of course, you're paying, arguably, for a service. I say arguably, and I'll come on to why it's arguable later. You're paying for a service and you're not receiving what you thought you were going to get and what you signed up for. In which case, I mean, it is potentially challengeable in a court of law. You would need a lawyer to go through that one, but it would be certainly a potential test case for someone to go forward and say, am I getting the service that I paid for under tuition fees if I'm only learning an online course when I signed up to an in-person university course? Not being tested in law, I don't know what the result would be, but I'm sure it is open for someone to take that challenge. It is perhaps something a student union or a national union of students or some other interested organisation could look at a test case if there was enough weight behind it. But there is a later point why actually I think people are over worried about this tuition fee issue, and I'll come to that more. But it's always best to speak to the university if you're unhappy before making any decisions, or perhaps speak to your university welfare office if you're struggling financially, or speak to the student union for representation on this. And hopefully, if there are many other students in a similar position to you or with similar feelings to you, then it's something that the university can address on a wider scale. But one of the important things to understand, surprisingly, it almost feels counter-logical, is that lowering tuition fees won't actually make any difference to the majority of students going to university in the UK. I'm going to focus this on the English system, which is where it's most pertinent, but similar principles apply. Let me try and explain why. When you go to university, the student loans company pays your tuition fees for you in most cases, and then you have to repay in the April after when you leave. You repay 9% of everything above a threshold. That threshold is currently £26,575. And you will repay 9% above that threshold for 30 years. If you earn below the threshold, if you earn less than £26,575, I'm going to call it the threshold from now on, then you don't repay anything in that year. Now, the current stats are that 83% of students are not likely to repay what they borrowed, which is tuition fee loan plus the living loan plus interest, in full within the 30 years. So they will, in some cases, partially pay that, meaning they repay back what they borrowed plus interest. In some cases, they'll pay less. You'll just repay back what you borrowed. Some will repay back less than they borrowed. Some, if they never earn over the threshold, will repay back nothing at all. Only the top 17%, generally highest earning graduates, will repay back in full what they borrowed at £9,000 tuition fees. So, what happens if we reduce tuition fees to £6,000 for this year? And it remains at £9,000 for your remaining years, because we hope, fingers crossed, please God, that everything gets back to normal next year and you go to university and everything's fine. What happens then? Well, reducing your total loan by £3,000 for someone who typically takes the tuition fee loans and the full maintenance loan that they're entitled to won't make any difference in what you repay in most cases. Because you still won't earn enough to repay that £3,000 lower loan plus interest over the 30 years. So you will still just repay 9% of everything you earn over £26,575, or the threshold this year and as it raises in future years, each year for 30 years. So you can have this big fight now. Now, total back of the envelope, not really a proper calculation, just and intuitively. If currently 17% of people will repay in full over the 30 years, then you would probably guess somewhere around 25 to 30%, or maybe even less than that, would repay in full with £3,000 lower loan. And maybe there's a few percent more who, while they wouldn't repay in full, will pay slightly less because of the £3,000 because they'd nearly repay in full. So what we have is, let's call it 30%. 30% of people, the highest earning graduates, would gain from slightly lower tuition fees for this year. Let's say you reduce from 9,000 to 6,000, or not even 9,000 to 4,500. Most won't. Most people going to university will not see any reduction in the amount that they have to contribute to their university education after they leave because of reducing tuition fees. Now, I say this not to say it's cheap, not to say it's fair, but to say, if it's really panicking you and making you angry, and it turns out there is nothing you can do, which I have to say is probably the most likely outcome unless someone takes it to court and the court rules, well then at least you can perhaps shrug your shoulders and say, you know what, I'm only going to end up paying this full whack back if I'm a high earning graduate afterwards. In which case, well, I mean, I always have this line that says, I hope going to university costs you a shed load of money, because it'll only cost you a shed load of money if you earn a shed load of money afterwards. So I hope that sort of explains to you the premise. Just one quick thing, and we do have more on this on Money Saving Expert, but just one quick other question that people come with, which is the question about accommodation. If you're now being told it was online and you thought you would need to be at university and you don't now want to go to university, what are your accommodation rights? Difficult one here again, I'm afraid. I mean, many halls of residence in the last term, pre-July, were, and over the COVID period, were giving people refunds. So if you're staying in university accommodation, it is worth talking to the university about that and the hall of residence about, well, look, you're telling me not to come, why do I have to pay? Again, difficult, you don't have a right, but universities tend to be more forbearing on that. If, however, you have signed a contract with a private landlord, I'm afraid there is no causal link here. You have asked somebody to provide accommodation for you, you've paid a deposit, the accommodation is available for you. The service is there. The fact that your plans have changed due to the university, not due to your fault, again, I'm not saying this is anyone's fault, I'm just being realistic, does not change the fact that you asked this individual for accommodation, or this individual or this organisation for accommodation, and you have still signed up to have accommodation. The best analogy I can give you is if you buy a tennis racket and the tennis racket's not faulty from a store and you break your arm, you can't take the tennis racket back saying it's faulty because you can't play it. And unfortunately, that is the situation for renting. Now, there should be some forbearance, talk to the landlord, see if you can come to an accommodation, meet somewhere in the middle. They may still be able to get a rental holiday from their mortgage provider until the 31st of October, which gives them some help. If they've got a mortgage, they may not. But unfortunately, again, it is very difficult to find a way around, if you've agreed a tenancy with someone, the fact that you don't want to go to where your university is because you no longer have courses there is not the landlord's fault. So it will be a question of negotiation. I hope many of them will understand. I hope many of them will put something in place, be forbearing, offer you a rate reduction, a rate freeze, something of that ilk. But forcing them to would be difficult. So there you go. I've just seen I've been talking for nearly 11 minutes. That's quite a long time on the back of this. So I hope it hasn't been too long. I hope it's understandable. I'm sorry I haven't got any firm answers for you. But I know these are questions that are milling around lots of people. So I wanted to try and get them out there.